Yeah.
Okay.
Ladles and jelly spoons, welcome back to the call-in show for the e-commerce leader. We're here with our usual expert panel over two sides of the pond. It's a big old pond, it is. So we've got Kyle Hamer and Jason Miles over on the West Coast, Chris Green on the East Coast, and then on the East Coast, but of a different continent, we've got Michael Veazey in London, England. So love London, England. Just makes me laugh every single time. But I guess London, Ontario is not quite the same. Today we are talking about price gouging versus price optimization in e-commerce. It almost feels like a sort of, it makes me think back to the sort of Soviet era of Russia when, people would get shot for profiteering. And it's not a phrase that has sort of come up for a long time, but suddenly it's a thing. So very interesting, very topical area. So gents, welcome to the debate. Let's get cracking with this one. Jason, what are your thoughts on what is the difference between price gouging and price optimization in e-commerce?
Yeah. Well, I wish I had a technical answer for that, but I don't. But I think at a personal level, I'm going to describe it this way. I wrote a little book a few years back called Pricing Power, and the first principle, there's 12 principles. The first principle is you need a pricing strategy for your business. And if you have a pricing strategy, then you have something that's a guide rail for your own operational practice. And I think the guide rail would be the thing that would prevent you from gouging. Now, a pricing strategy generally comes in three flavors: vanilla, chocolate, or strawberry. Just kidding. You've got luxury pricing, you've got neutral pricing, and then you've got kind of the low cost leader or the low price leader. People also call that penetration pricing. So those three kind of trajectories are very common for business, and I would say you're optimizing your pricing if you're following your plan and sticking to your approach, and you're gouging if you're just throwing your plan out the window and saying, I'm going to go nuts with my pricing strategy here in the short term because I think I can make a buck. So I don't know if that helps frame the topic at all, but there you go. That's my 2 cents on it.
Interesting. So that's a sort of self-defined by the entrepreneur rather than by the market or governments or anyone else by the sound of it. Okay, Chris, what are your thoughts on this august topic?
All right, I got good thoughts because I've dealt with this a lot. And price gouging has a definition, and I think that's what people forget. And there's tons of words in the English language that people don't realize actually have definitions, and they use them improperly. And if you're saying in the Amazon, the arbitrage, retail arbitrage, online arbitrage world, where people are price gouging when they're buying toys at Walmart and Target, and they're selling them in Q4 at Christmas time for 3, 4, 5 times the price, and they accuse them of these sellers of price gouging. That's not price gouging, literally by definition, because toys at Christmas time are not a necessity. So there are laws against price gouging, and they have to deal with things like gasoline during cleanup from a hurricane. You can't just say, "Oh, we're going to price our gas at $20 a gallon." No, you can't do that. The government will stop that because at that time, gas is a necessity. Now we're dealing with this. Not just on Amazon, but kind of nationwide, this baby formula shortage. I don't have kids that are on baby formula, so I'm not as affected by it. So I'm not following it that closely. But if you think of like, oh, there's this shortage and there's demand, wait a minute, that means the price is going to go up. And if I can find this product, then I can make a profit. Now, finding products and making a profit is totally, I mean, that's capitalism, right? But baby formula is a necessity. So Amazon is going to take steps to prevent price gouging, as they should. And I mean, we saw this during the beginning of the pandemic with hand sanitizer and wipes and things like that. And at the time, those weren't classified as necessities because we never really lived through a pandemic. We really didn't know what we needed and all this stuff. But as it became obvious that they were a necessity, anybody that was price gouging, pricing way too high, got in trouble. Some people lost Amazon accounts. People got in some pretty big trouble for it. So I want people to remember there is a difference depending on what you're selling. And if you're being accused of price gouging, which sometimes Amazon customers do in the review section, and be like, I can't believe you're selling this toy. Yeah, well, you don't have to buy it, right? It is not a necessity. So it's by definition, selling at over retail prices on Amazon is not price gouging. Now, I will kind of give some insider information from Amazon. Of course, anybody that's selling on Amazon for any period of time knows that Amazon has kind of price controls in there of like the warning if you're priced too high or even if you're priced too low. And if you're priced way too high, and it varies by category and by item, they will kind of suspend or suppress the buy box offers and make it harder for customers to find you. They can still find you and buy products from you if they really want to, but Amazon does not want customers looking at Amazon as a high price destination. And this is the behind the scenes info, where Amazon has said, look, we don't need to be known as the lowest price destination, but we do want to be known as a low price destination. And this came about because there was an article where people were selling like some special edition Frosted Flakes for like $40 a box. And people are like, I can't believe Amazon is selling it. And they don't know the difference between Amazon and third-party sellers. And Amazon is not going to be participating in over retail pricing or price gouging, but third-party sellers in the marketplace sometimes are. And customers don't know the difference, so Amazon is going to put rules in place. So I know it's a long answer for price gouging, but I think people need to really understand that there's a difference. There is a definition of price gouging, and you need to use it, appropriately and properly.
I like that. I have to say, as a linguist and a massive pedant, as my wife would be the first to tell you, that I really like proper definitions of words. So thank you, Chris. That's very reassuring to me personally. Kyle, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a number. I mean, Chris laid it out pretty well. I mean, there is definite laws on the books for price gouging in particular industries, but it's not universal across the board, right? So, but then certain states do have definitions of what price gouging is. So if you live in a state, you better be sure about your own laws where you live in order when you're thinking about your pricing. Now, I've heard a lot of definitions around it, and even on Amazon, I've seen where if you're moving your prices based on an external stimulus, meaning if it's COVID related and you add hand sanitizer and your hand sanitizer is now 300% more expensive on your listing, you're probably going to have an issue with Amazon in terms of price gouging. What I've seen is about anything above a 20% swing, you need to be mindful of, at least in my experience. Now you can gradually grow your price up, but if you jack your price up by over 20%, that has a tendency to be, in my experience on Amazon, a flagging action, right? Like that's going to be something that's going to raise some eyebrows, particularly if you're in an industry that is hypersensitive to it. So I think fundamentally, though, it kind of comes down to the question of, are you selling a necessity, for example, baby formula, like Chris mentioned, right? And then at what point, just because you can price something at a certain level and people might buy it, is it still the right thing to do? Is like ethically the right choice to make? Do you ethically say, I can maximize my profit and squeeze everything out of it? Or do I say, no, this is a fair price for my products, I'm making a profit? Like, where do you draw the line there? I think that's a more fundamental question of what you have to decide as a business. Are you going to squeeze every last cent, every last shilling out of your potential client, or are you going to still leave them on the table, be competitive, and part of that's going to be what the market around you, your competitors are doing, because you're not setting prices in a vacuum, right? Like that's the other thing people have to keep in mind, is that you should be setting your price, based on what your competitors are doing, either going above them or below them, depending on your strategy and where your product sits in sort of that spectrum of goods. I think the big question is, what do you decide to do ethically as a company?
Yeah, a lot of interesting thoughts there. So it seems like, to summarize so far, there's an internal guide rail that's kind of more about business rational thinking, I guess, from you, Jason. There's the Amazon regulations and government regulations about properly defined price gouging. Thank you, Chris. And Kyle, you're saying about the sort of internal guidance that one gets, as the entrepreneur or the business owner or somebody involved in running the business. For me, I'm interested in the external guide rails given by governments, because for starters, they are much harder, or they're kind of fluffier but harder, which is to say governments can take ages to be clear about stuff, but it may mean jail time if you really go mad, whereas Amazon account suspension is pretty major if you only sell on Amazon. That's very relevant in the UK right now, because like a lot of the world, the types of commodities this applies to is really shifting. And the famous one at the moment is that we've got BP and Shell headquartered here in the UK, in London, and they have had a lot of profits this year because of oil price going crazy. And there's been talk about a windfall tax. The Chancellor, who's kind of heads towards liberal markets, has said initially that would be a disincentive to make profits, which would be true, of course. But it seems that a lot of people are wavering because they're now going to have to pay out a crazy amount of money to kind of see off the massive price hikes in gas, as we call it, and gas as you would call it, which is to say natural gas you heat your home with, and gasoline or petrol at the pump, both of which have gone up about 50% in the last few months. So I think it's worth keeping an eye on the regulations. Obviously, in the States, you have, well, state governments, which makes life considerably more complex. How that interacts with Amazon, I don't even begin to know. But I think it's worth keeping an eye on the government, but also then popular sentiment within your specific market, which doesn't mean, to your point, Chris, the ranty person raving with a 1-star review on Amazon, that's going to happen anyway. It doesn't mean angry people on Facebook and Twitter, but if there's an overall groundswell of opinion, either across the nation or within a state or within a particular market, I think it's worth keeping an eye on that. Which isn't quite an ethical point. It may become a legal point, but it's also a question of brand and your relationship with your audience as well, I think.
Yeah.
So some thoughts, second round thoughts in response to that. Anyone desperate to jump in? Jason?
Yeah, I mean, there's two other factors that we haven't really mentioned, which is one, all business operators are going through an intense process of rediscovery of pricing on their cost of goods side, and cost of goods are going nuts. And so, you know, that's a factor that means you're either going to adjust your pricing or you're going to crater your profit margin. Those are, I mean, or become more efficient as a business. I mean, there are only a few levers to pull. So that's definitely a factor. So whether you need to or can raise your prices by 10, 20, 30% might not be a function of capitalist, desire and greed. It might be a function of, I have to make a profit to keep my business going. Therefore, I'm raising my prices. I told Michael the other day that my mentor is a restaurateur, and he has mayonnaise packets he gets, and the box of mayonnaise packets went from a box for him as a big item, $11 for the box to $36. So they tripled, and those are a giveaway thing for him. He's not monetizing that. It's just out on the counter type thing. So that's the reality for many business operators. They're looking at how to redeem the mess they're in by raising prices. Point number two I just mentioned is some businesses have pricing power and some don't. You're in a good business when you can raise your prices and nothing bad happens in terms of consumer sentiment or behavior. And the optimal path in that regard is to raise your prices systematically in keeping with the times and running your business effectively, leveraging the pricing power you have. That's the smart move. So that's not socialism, that's capitalism, but you don't want to be, out of whack with it. But it's just a reality. Some businesses have better pricing power, and to not identify that and understand it in your business is to make a massive error. And so I think those two things are important to keep in mind. It isn't just the egalitarian thing to do, raise prices or not raise prices. There's brutal reality for business operators in the back end, which we all, of course, realize as we're running our businesses. So I don't know if that helps at all, but there you go.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? It's there's often a perception amongst consumers who, in the same breath, will go around and ask their boss for a 10% raise twice a year if the inflation's going crazy, right? Chris, any thoughts on that?
I think we really haven't talked about how time sensitive price gouging is, because price gouging it's very strongly connected, to time. There's gonna be times where you can price gouge or where you can sell at an over retail price. And some of those times are just like, hey, it's Q4, it's Christmas time, and I got my hustle on, and I've got all these products. And yes, I'm going to make a profit from the parents who are willing and able to pay a premium for these hard to find toys. It's because it's not a necessity. But at the same time, we're throwing around words like capitalism, monopolies, competition. These are all things that affect the market and affect the price. If someone's price gouging, if someone's making too much money, someone's going to come in and compete, right? Or time is going to change and go by and be like, hey, that demand's not there anymore. Everybody that wanted that $99 toy for $400 now has it. So that part of the demand curve is now gone. Now you're down to the 300 and the 250s and the 200s, and things are going to change. There's a famous quote from Jeff Bezos that I think everybody should remember, especially Amazon sellers, especially arbitrage sellers, is that your margin is someone else's opportunity. So if you're making good money, or if you're making too much money, someone's going to come in and say, you know what, I can do that and I'll do it for less. And that's where the market's going to come to equilibrium. And especially when you're on a marketplace like Amazon, where Amazon retail is a player, to come in and say, I mean, Amazon tracks Walmart and Target. They know what that box of cereal sells for at Walmart. And if they look and they're like, wait a minute, we are not competitively priced. Our third-party marketplace is not supplying this product at a competitive price for our customers. Remember, it doesn't have to be the lowest price, but it does need to be a low price destination. That's when you're in trouble, and Amazon retail comes in and undercuts you. Amazon retail will come in and say, look, you guys are not providing this at a competitive price. We will do it ourselves. And Amazon retail doesn't want to do that. I in a perfect world, market equilibrium, Amazon retail only sells loss leaders because the third-party marketplace supplies everything else at a competitive price. Amazon will leave you alone if you're at a competitive price. But if you're flipping, Target brand products for 3x on Amazon, Amazon's going to notice, and they're going to suppress the buy box, and they're going to do things about it. So there's times where, you can make money flipping, like retail arbitrage products, Q4 type stuff. Stay away from the price gouging, but it's a complicated system, and you got to remember, you're here to provide value to a customer, and if you're not doing that, you're going to go out of business eventually. Time's going to go by, and your opportunities are going to disappear.
Yeah, I like that. Just to come in on that, I think the idea that markets get back into equilibrium, I think, is correct. I guess, am I a free market liberal? I don't know. The reality is that most markets are way more controlled by governments than any one free market sort of hardcore person likes to admit, including, I must say, the US. So Milton Friedman has probably been more, implemented in the UK than in the US, I would argue, particularly under Thatcher onwards. But nevertheless, even if you don't interfere with the government, there's going to be an almighty gap between the high price and then the correction. So they say that the solution in the oil industry, the solution for high prices is high prices. So in other words, if prices are high, lots of people enter the market and supply stuff. More supply means that the price comes down. That can take a very long time with certain types of products. And I wonder whether that means that there's going to be such a painful gap and it's going to last for so long that we're going to see quite a lot of changes in regulation, whether by Amazon, which is a quasi-governmental body for anyone who sells on it, or actual governments. I don't know if anyone's got any thoughts on that. Kyle, obviously you haven't let you have a say yet, so plunge in.
No, I mean, I think just kind of summarizing it, you have inputs in your own business, right? Like that Jason mentioned with inflationary pressures. And I think that that's completely reasonable. And I think if you're not raising your prices or evaluating your prices, you're going to shoot yourself in the foot, right? Like you're going to be losing money. At the same time, to Chris's point, price gouging specifically is very time bound, and it's usually driven by some other external factor, right? So in this case, with the baby formula stuff, there's just a shortage, and so people are buying it, and hoarding it, and then turning it around and flipping it, on Facebook Marketplace or whatever, right? Or OfferUp, and so they're trying to make a buck out of that. And I think the difference between, I guess for me around price gouging and optimization comes down to choices for the consumer. If the consumer doesn't have a choice, right? Like for example, I read this article about this lady whose baby requires a specific type of formula because of allergies, right? It needs to be this hypoallergenic. They have to have this, right? And if they're given and that's the only option that they have, and people are like buying it up in bulk and then trying to flip it for like 400% of what they bought it for, like that person doesn't have a choice, right? They can't be like in the toy market on Q4 and be like, oh, actually I can just go buy this other, I'll have an alternative. So I think that should be weighed into it for sure. But I do think that you have to optimize your prices. You have to be aware of it. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. Like your pricing is affected by the marketplaces you're on. And to Chris's point too, I would say this, like Amazon, even if you're a third-party marketplace seller and you have a product and you're selling on Amazon and it sells on Walmart, they're actually looking at the price on Walmart and other marketplaces as well. And you will actually lose the buy box to what's called a pricing error on Amazon if your price is not matched to your Walmart pricing. And you can kind of get in repricer wars even with yourself, even if you run the listing on both of them, or maybe you're using a wholesaler and they're selling it on one of these other platforms. You can actually get in a pricing battle with yourself, with your own products across those platforms, and actually be losing sales on Amazon because now the buy box is no longer available for people to buy. And you have to go through a couple of other steps to actually buy the product, which kills your conversion. So you have to be aware. It all happens. There's a lot of inputs that are occurring into it. I think it kind of goes down what's the best for your customer and what's the best for your business. Because if you're ultimately trying to serve and balance that out, I think you're going to be in a good place.
Yeah, they sound like a very, very simple but healthy questions. And to your point, Chris, if you're not providing value, then ultimately the market will punish you. And that's the ultimate corrective mechanism. And that reminds me of another Jeff Bezos quote, which is, we should be aware of our competitors. We should fear our customers. And as an Amazon seller, I can absolutely attest that he's succeeded in creating an environment where I fear the customers because of their power to give a 1-star review, which could, destroy an entire Amazon account. I've seen that, and a friend of mine, it's taken him months to come back from that. So in the end, I guess that's probably where the power should be, right, with the consumers. So, gents, I would suggest a practical takeaway round, then a quick round. What are our practical takeaways for e-commerce operators to sort of try and get their heads around price optimization versus price gouging in the e-commerce? Let's start with you, Jason.
Yeah, I'd say have a pricing plan for your business and stick to it, and articulate it, write it down, share it with your team. Go deep into your own plan and monitor your own costs very carefully. That's my best suggestion, I think.
Excellent suggestion. Chris?
I would remind all sellers to just be aware of the market price and the difference between necessities and non-necessities when it comes to over retail pricing versus price gouging. Because over retail, big deal. Someone can not buy something and buy something else. But if you get busted for price gouging on Amazon, you can lose your entire business, especially if you're very heavy on Amazon. It's not worth it just for to squeeze a few bucks out of a single ASIN at one point in time. It's not worth it, in my opinion. And some people may have to learn that lesson the hard way. I hope they don't.
Yeah, agreed with that. And just one little point on top of that, I use Uber a lot, which has surge pricing, just as a sort of thing that airlines have these days. And the brand relationship that I find myself and my wife having with it, my wife uses it a lot more than me, is not great. I think if you have violent swings in pricing, it leads to, from the consumer, this is very unscientific, but I think it can lead to a poor relationship with the brand from the consumer. So that's one reason I think that Amazon quite rightly steps in and says we don't want to see those extreme fluctuations, which isn't quite the same as high or low price, right? So some kind of stability to pricing, I think, is important as well. Kyle, let's take it home. Practical advice.
Practical advice: automate your pricing plan. So Jason says have a pricing plan for your business, but when possible, automate it. What I mean by that, there are tools that allow you to test your price points for a bunch of different factors. You can optimize it for conversion rate. You can optimize it for ideally profitability, because there's going to be a range in which the conversion rate your customer wants to buy, and maybe your price too low. Outside of other external factors around supply chain, but maybe just your price in the market is too low and you need to raise it. A quick example of this is a few years ago in our Amazon business, we had one of our sketchbooks. I was like, are we really competitive? I mean, we're priced competitively, but are we too competitive? Are we actually too cheap? And so we ran a split test, and we ended up actually making more money and more sales at like a $2 higher price point than what we did when we were at actually a lower price point. And so we actually literally added $2 per unit in profit to that sketchbook for every single sale. And the only reason we got to that data is that we actually tested it, and we tested it automatically. We set it up to run, we let it do its thing. It tested different price points within a range that we set it for, and we optimized for the ideal price point for profitability. I would encourage you to do that in your own business within all possible.
Yeah, absolutely love that. What I really like, gents, is that I think we've come up with some quite rational responses to what can be a very emotive subject, which is super important for any business owner, right? We've got to keep our heads screwed on while all around us are losing theirs and blaming them on you. That's a quote from Rudyard Kipling. There you go. Very British way to bring this to a close. So, folks, if you have enjoyed the e-commerce leader hot takes show, I can even speak English today, then do come and check us out on the nearest app that you can use for podcasts, such as Apple Podcasts and Spotify, to name but two of the many platforms we're on. And do give us a bit of love with a star rating on Apple, and you can even do that on Spotify as well now. Thanks so much for joining us today and for joining us in our debate on the e-commerce leader.
Bye.
Bye, guys.